welcome to Infokemp channel. I've spoken many times on the financial crisis and what could be the possible ramifications of a Greek bailout or Greek default for the EU, being that the euro could collapse if Greece defaults, and then there is a credit crunch where banks do not lend to other banks because of the funds being taken from the EU into what is essentially a broke banking system, and then banks not lending out to other banks and to the general public. Thus, that would be, in Keynesian terms, a liquidity trap. But what does Euronews have to say on the subject?
France and Germany have reached a joint position on a second bailout for Greece ahead of the crisis Eurozone summit in Brussels. President Nicolas Sarkozy met with Chancellor Angela Merkel in Berlin to hammer out a rescue plan ahead of today's crucial talks to discuss the region's deepening debt crisis. Earlier, Commission President José Manuel Barroso met with Premier George Papandreou to reassure him that Europe would find a way. He warned that failure to act would have global repercussions. Although no details of the new Sarkozy-Merkel plan have been revealed, it's believed it will include a contribution by Europe's banking sector.
So, Herman Van Rompuy and Barroso, the head of the EU civil service, Herman Van Rompuy being the president of the EU, have both said that this is an absolute critical point and a crisis point, and that Europe really needs to pull together. But what do the Greeks think of it on the street? Here again, I use Euronews.
The summer street scenes in Athens perhaps belie the anxiety that exists over the risk of Greece going bankrupt. The shadow that's been hanging over the country for several months has brought measures that have hit these people hard in their pockets. Now, as their fates lay in the hands of politicians in Brussels, all they could do was wait. We're expecting help from France and Germany, said this shopkeeper, for the good of Greece, but also so that we don't drag the rest of Europe down, Italy and Portugal. One Greek minister has criticised the lack of decisions at European level as a disaster for Europe and a slow death for Greece. He remains optimistic, however.
We believe that in next 3-4 years we could arrive to increasing our GDP at the same level as we had in 2009, but with by a healthy way. So I believe that our political will is very strong, and our belief is that we will achieve our goals.
As ministers met in Brussels, Greek taxi drivers blocked ports and airports, disrupting tourists for a fourth day. They're fighting deregulation. The government plans to open up their trade to competition in line with EU and IMF demands, a condition of last year's bailout.
So things are very unpleasant in Greece at the moment, because they've had to go through a major restructuring of their entire economy. But Angela Merkel has said about the need perhaps for a tax on banks, and this would lead us into even more unpleasant territory as banks consider their position within Europe. Now, in many ways, because of Lehman Brothers and the Federal Reserve in the United States and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae being insurers, all these banking and insurance companies did cause the crisis, especially the Federal Reserve. But perhaps we should get past the blame game at this point, because we really do need to save Europe and save also not only Europe but the ramifications for England, because we have 40% of our trade is with the European Union and the Eurozone countries. What is the solution? Well, all the current solutions are pretty unpleasant, but Paul Romer's idea for chartered cities is perhaps one way that investment could get into Greece without an unpleasant outcome. Many of the Greeks' assets for their tourist industry, such as islands and monuments, could be sold off in the process of restructuring their economy towards manufacturing for exports and imports, and trading also to bring in imports, to make it more productive, more like the German model. and economists have said that they need the German fiscal discipline to carry the situation through to a positive conclusion. But one of these islands could be chosen for the start of a chartered town or a chartered city, but we need something pretty big, around 100,000 square kilometres, about the size of Manhattan, for approximately 10 million people. Now, Greece is a very small country with a small population, and so in Paul Romer's idea for a chartered city, you would need a considerable amount of investment. How this could be started off could be through military cohesionism from the EU, a NATO base, considering that Greece is in the EU and Turkey is not, which is why Greece is very militarised, because it has to confront Turkey in its foreign policy. The countries have been to war many times. But a NATO base and then an EU base could be built so that an airport could be facilitated, a port could be facilitated. That would draw people to those areas, and then eventually the civilian infrastructure would be built by attracting investors to the already built up infrastructure that the military has built. You could see this in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii as an example, or Hong Kong as an even better example. Now, the chartered city would have to have some good rules in it, which would attract people who wanted to make things. Perhaps not a very high standard of living at first, but you would perhaps bring them in and say you can have free land, up to an acre of land, to develop however you wished, so that the city would grow organically as well as through a good rational plan, and then develop agriculture around the city as well. So a core of the city might be through manufacturing, because Greece needs to manufacture more products to get a good industrial base going, and the machines that make other machines, capital goods, could be supplied by Germany and France directly without the need for the Greeks to buy them. The whole thing could be administered by Denmark, although Germany was the first country to recognise the modern Greek state because of the Bavarian influence on German politics at the time. The Danes are considered the happiest people in the world per capita, and perhaps they having a more neutral slant on it, and perhaps being slightly more Eurosceptic, would be a better PR way of doing the chartered city idea in the terms of Europe. But it would only just be the start. We need to make a massive multiplier effect in Europe, and the best way to do that is to mass produce cities on an industrial scale throughout the spare non-arable land of Europe, which is still vast. Develop cities there to recolonise Europe with Europeans, because we have an immigration problem in Europe, and also then develop along the East African coast chartered cities all the way down from the north, from Egypt to south, the Horn of Africa, where I build a new second Jewish state, and then all the way down to South Africa, where a chartered city could be the start of a Boer independent republic. All this could be linked in with different European countries to help with the administration, although these cities would not be part of the EU, with the exception of those that are within the EU's territory in relation to Greece or other countries. All these chartered cities could start off as bases for EU forces, although there would be no coercion in this. It would all be based on choice for people to live there, both Europeans and non-Europeans. So I hope you like this idea, and I'll carry it on further when I speak more widely about South Africa